The first Europeans broke the textbook image when ancient DNA pointed to dark skin and blue eyes. That was not the face many classrooms had quietly planted in people's minds. The old picture showed a pale hunter in Ice Age Europe, already looking like a rough version of modern Northern Europeans, wrapped in fur beside a cave wall or a frozen river. Then bones from Mesolithic Europe started giving up their genomes. One of the most important came from La Braña, a cave system in northwest Spain. Another came from Cheddar Gorge in Britain. Both belonged to hunter-gatherers who lived before farming remade the continent, before Bronze Age herders crossed the plains, before the genetic map of Europe became the one most people recognize today. The contradiction was sharp. Some of these early Western hunter-gatherers carried genetic variants linked to blue eyes, yet they lacked key light-skin variants common in many later Europeans. The first model broke there. Textbooks had treated ancestry, skin color, eye color, and geography as if they traveled together in one neat package. Europe was cold, Europe was northern, so the first Europeans, many assumed, must have quickly become European-looking in the modern sense. Ancient DNA did not support that picture. It showed that traits people now bundle together were once separated. Light eyes could appear before lighter skin became widespread. Hunter-gatherer ancestry could survive in modern people without bringing a modern face with it. The continent was not one unbroken line from Ice Age cave to modern nation. To understand why this result changed the story, the evidence has to be read where the old image was actually tested. Bone powder, teeth, pigment genes, and ancestry segments preserved for thousands of years. Ancient DNA is genetic material recovered from old human remains. It can come from teeth, long bones, or the dense part of the skull near the inner ear, called the petrous bone. That bone matters because it often protects DNA after the rest of the skeleton has decayed, cracked, or been contaminated by soil and handling. In a clean lab, researchers do not ask a skull what race it was. They read fragments of the genome and compare them with known patterns. Some fragments show ancestry. Some point to immune history. Some sit near genes that influence visible traits, such as skin, hair, and eye color. The caveat matters here. Skin color is not controlled by one racial switch. Eye color is not a passport. A face is not a destiny. These traits come from many genetic regions, shaped by inheritance, selection, chance, diet, geography, and migration over long periods of time. Two genes often discussed in European pigmentation are SLC24A5 and SLC45A2. Certain variants in these genes are strongly associated with lighter skin in many present-day Europeans. They are not moral markers. They are biological variations that became common under particular historical conditions. For blue eyes, researchers often look near the HERC2 and OCA2 region. Changes there can reduce brown pigment in the iris, allowing blue eyes to appear. Again, this does not measure intelligence, value, strength, purity, or worth. It measures one inherited trait among many. That distinction is not politeness, it is scientific accuracy. The genome does not rank people. It records descent, mixture, adaptation, and survival. When ancient DNA shows that an old European hunter may have had darker pigmentation and light eyes, it is not lowering or raising anyone. It is correcting a false mental picture. That correction matters because appearance has often been used backward. People look at modern populations, project those faces into the deep past, and then treat the projection as history. Ancient DNA gives a more stubborn form of evidence. It takes powder from a tooth or skull and asks what was actually there. Once that rule is clear, the old European story can be tested against the skeletons themselves. Modern humans entered Europe more than 40,000 years ago. They arrived in a continent already holding Neanderthal history, cold grasslands, forest edges, river valleys, mammoth country, and caves whose walls would later preserve handprints and animals in mineral color. Those first Homo sapiens groups did not live in one stable Europe. Ice sheets expanded, forests retreated, populations moved south, split apart, shrank, and sometimes vanished. During the harshest Ice Age periods, people survived in refuges, warmer pockets in regions such as Iberia, Italy, the Balkans, and parts of the steppe borderlands. The old textbook version made this easier to remember. It showed modern humans arriving in Europe, adapting to northern light, growing paler, and slowly becoming the ancestors of later Europeans. The picture was simple enough for a classroom map. It was also too simple. Before ancient DNA, researchers had fewer tools. They studied living Europeans and worked backward. They compared stone tools, burial objects, skull shapes, cave art, and language theories. They could see that Europe had Paleolithic hunters, Neolithic farmers, and Bronze Age migrations, but the biological relationship between those layers was uncertain. A skull could suggest a shape. A tool could suggest a culture. A burial could suggest a ritual. None of them could show the full ancestry hidden inside the cells. That is where the old map failed. Living people are mixtures of many past populations. If scientists only study modern Europeans, they are reading the last page of a long record and trying to reconstruct the earlier chapters. Ancient DNA changed the order. It let researchers open the older pages directly. In 2014, a study published in Nature analyzed the genome of Labranja 1, a roughly 7,000-year-old Mesolithic hunter-gatherer from northwest Spain. He lived long after the first modern humans entered Europe, but before farming ancestry had fully transformed the west of the continent. His bones came from a time between worlds. The Ice Age was gone. Forests had spread. Small groups hunted, gathered, fished, and moved through a Europe that did not yet have wheat fields, cattle villages, or the dense farming settlements that would later change the human map. Researchers expected him to clarify the hunter-gatherer layer behind modern Europe. He did that, but he also disturbed a powerful assumption. His genome did not line up with the familiar modern stereotype. The variants around his eye color pointed toward blue eyes. Yet important variants linked to lighter skin in present-day Europeans were absent, or not in the form expected for a pale-skinned northern image. The first skeleton tested in that way did not match the face many people had been taught to imagine. Labranja 1 was not a modern Spaniard placed in the past. He was not a simple preview of later Europe. He belonged to a Western hunter-gatherer world, whose genetic profile was related to modern Europeans, but not identical to any modern nation, region, or racial label. That is the first part of the reversal. The second part is more unsettling. The combination itself was unexpected. In the modern mind, blue eyes are often placed beside pale skin, as if they belong to one ancient package. Labranja showed that this package could be broken apart by history. The genome kept one more record. His DNA carried versions near HERC2 and OCA2, associated with blue eyes. At the same time, he did not carry the derived versions of SLC24A5 and SLC45A2 in the way many present-day Europeans do. In plain language, some early European hunter-gatherers could have light eyes while retaining darker skin pigmentation. That does not mean every hunter-gatherer in Europe looked the same. Ancient Europe was large, scattered, and changing. But it does mean the old default image was wrong. Labranja also showed another difference from many later Europeans. He lacked the strong genetic signal for adult lactase persistence, the ability to digest milk sugar after childhood. That trait became common in parts of Europe much later, after herding and dairy culture created new survival pressures. So the same skeleton challenged several assumptions at once. Skin color, eye color, diet, ancestry, and modern European identity did not arrive together. They were assembled at different times. Then Britain added another visual shock. Cheddar Man, found in Cheddar Gorge in Somerset, lived about 10,000 years ago. His skeleton had been known for generations, but genome analysis allowed researchers to revisit his appearance with methods earlier scholars did not have. DNA-based reconstruction suggested a man with dark or dark-to-black skin, dark hair, and blue or green eyes. The public reaction was immediate because the image collided with expectation. Britain, in the modern imagination, is not usually introduced through a dark-skinned Mesolithic hunter-gatherer with pale eyes. Yet the skeleton came from Britain itself, long before Stonehenge, long before Celtic languages, long before Rome, long before England existed as a name. The evidence points in a narrower direction. Reconstructions are probability models, not photographs. Ancient DNA can estimate likely traits, but it cannot restore every shade of skin, every facial detail, every lived identity, or every season of a person's life. Still, the broad reversal is strong. In parts of Mesolithic Western Europe, hunter-gatherers could carry light eye variants before the later spread of lighter skin variants that became common in many Europeans. That order matters. It means blue eyes were not born as a symbol of modern northern whiteness. They were one genetic feature moving through a much older and more complicated population history. The skull in the museum case had been misread by imagination before DNA ever touched it. For years, people saw ancient European remains and filled in the missing face with modern assumptions. Pale skin was projected backward. National identity was projected backward. A modern map was placed over a continent that had no modern borders, no modern languages, and no modern populations in their present form. Labragna and Cheddarman did not erase European ancestry. They made it older and stranger. They showed that some of Europe's real ancestors would not have looked like the textbook figures drawn around them. That solved one mystery, but it opened a deeper one. If the light skin variants common in later Europeans were not already fixed among some early Western hunter-gatherers, where did they become widespread? The answer was not a single mutation appearing in one cave. It was migration, farming, selection, and mixture across thousands of years. The first Europeans were not direct stand-ins for modern Europeans because modern Europeans are not made from one ancient stream. They carry ancestry from Western hunter-gatherers, whose deep roots reach back into Ice Age and post-Ice Age Europe. They carry ancestry from early farmers who moved into Europe from Anatolia and the Aegean region around 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. They also carry ancestry from steppe pastoralists, who expanded during the Bronze Age, often linked to Yamnaya-related populations from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. These were not footnotes. They were population movements large enough to reshape the continent. The second layer was stranger. When early farmers entered Europe, they brought more than wheat, barley, sheep, goats, cattle, and village life. They brought ancestry that was different from the hunter-gatherers already living there. In many regions, they also carried pigmentation variants that would become important in later European populations, including forms of SLC24A5 associated with lighter skin. This did not happen as a clean replacement everywhere. In some places, farmers mixed with local hunter-gatherers. In others, hunter-gatherer ancestry remained low for a time and then rose again. Ancient DNA has shown that Europe's map changed unevenly, valley by valley, coast by coast, cemetery by cemetery. A farming village in Central Europe was not the same genetic world as a hunter-gatherer camp near the Atlantic. A burial in Iberia did not carry the same proportions as one near the Danube. The continent was becoming layered. Then came another transformation. During the Bronze Age, steppe pastoralists moved westward, bringing a major ancestry component that spread through large parts of Europe. These groups are often connected with Yamnaya-related ancestry, wheeled transport, herding economies, and later debates about Indo-European languages. In 2015, major ancient DNA studies published in Nature, including work by teams associated with David Reich's group and the University of Copenhagen, showed how large these ancestry shifts were. They compared ancient genomes from hunter-gatherers, early farmers, and Bronze Age populations, then mapped how those streams combined into later Europeans. The result did not look like one continuous people slowly changing color in place. It looked like a continent rebuilt several times. Western hunter-gatherers contributed one layer. Anatolian-related farmers contributed another. Steppe pastoralists contributed another. Older and smaller layers also remained in the background, including traces connected to earlier human expansions and the distant Neanderthal ancestry carried by all non-African populations. The point is not that one layer was more European than another. That is the old mistake, wearing new clothing. The point is that Europe was never genetically frozen. A modern European genome records collisions, absorptions, marriages, vanished camps, burned forests, farming frontiers, herding routes, and children born between communities that once would have seemed separate. The archive is mixed because the history was mixed. That is why the first answer was not simply that Europeans looked different in the past. The deeper answer was that the category itself changed. Europe as a genetic region was assembled over time from people who did not all share the same appearance, diet, language, or ancestry. The early hunter-gatherers were real ancestors, but they were not the whole source. They carried combinations of traits that later history separated in the public imagination. Light eyes could be old in some Western hunter-gatherer lines. Lighter skin variants could rise later through farmer ancestry, selection, and changing environments. Lactase persistence could spread strongly after dairying became useful. Steppe ancestry could then shift the genetic balance again. That is a very different story from the classroom image of a pale Ice Age European slowly becoming modern. It also explains why consumer DNA tests can hide the ancient sequence. A modern report may say British, Spanish, French, Irish, Scandinavian, or broadly Northwestern European. Those labels are based on present-day reference panels and recent ancestry. They are not a full timeline of how the ancient layers arrived. A person may see a percentage on a screen and imagine one stable people stretching backward for tens of thousands of years. Ancient DNA says the truth is more layered. The region on the report is the latest address, not the whole migration file. Skin color changed under selection and mixture. Latitude mattered because ultraviolet light affects vitamin D production. Diet mattered because farming and herding changed what bodies had to process. Population size mattered because small groups can carry traits by chance. Migration mattered because new ancestry arrived with living people, not abstract colors on a map. None of this creates a moral ranking. Dark skin in a Mesolithic European hunter-gatherer is not a scandal. Pale skin in later Europe is not proof of purity. Blue eyes are not ownership of a continent. Lactose tolerance is not civilization. These are inherited traits shaped by conditions, movements, and time. The danger comes when modern identity tries to force them into one story. People want ancestry to behave like a flag. The genome behaves more like a damaged archive, with pages from different centuries bound together in one body. Blue eyes, pale skin, and European identity did not arrive as one package. That single sentence breaks a surprising number of assumptions. It breaks the idea that all visible European traits are equally ancient. It breaks the idea that modern faces can be projected backward without evidence. It breaks the idea that a continent has one original look. It also protects the story from another mistake. Ancient hunter-gatherers should not be turned into modern political symbols. La Bretagne one did not belong to Spain in the modern sense. Cheddar Man did not belong to Britain in the modern sense. They lived before those identities existed. They belong first to the human past. Their DNA can tell us about ancestry, pigmentation probabilities, diet adaptation, and migration. It cannot tell us who they would vote for, what nation they would claim, or how modern people should rank themselves. The evidence is powerful, but its power has limits. Now, the opening contradiction can be put back together. The first Europeans were real ancestors of later people, but not the people the old picture claimed. They were not pale textbook figures waiting for modern nations to arrive. They were hunter-gatherers living in forests, caves, river valleys, and coastal edges, carrying combinations of traits that later Europeans would inherit only in altered form. Imagine a classroom map corrected by bone powder. On the old wall chart, arrows move into Europe and become a familiar face. The skin lightens early. The eyes, hair, and ancestry settle into a single image. The story feels clean because every feature is made to match the modern stereotype. Then a technician drills a tiny sample from an ancient tooth. A lab screen fills with damaged fragments. The fragments are compared to living genomes and other ancient remains. The museum skull, silent for thousands of years, forces the map to change. The pale hunter on the chart fades. In his place is a harder picture. Darker pigmented hunter-gatherers in parts of Mesolithic Europe, light eye variants already present in some lines, farmer ancestry arriving from the southeast with new genes and new ways of life. Then steppe ancestry reshaping the continent again during the Bronze Age. This is the real reversal promised by the ancient DNA. Textbooks did not necessarily lie by intent. Many were built from older evidence, older assumptions, and simplified drawings meant to make prehistory teachable. But once ancient genomes arrived, the simple picture could not stand unchanged. The first Europeans were not who many textbooks had taught people to imagine, because Europe itself was not one thing. It was a meeting ground. It was a refuge during cold periods and a corridor during warmer ones. It was crossed by hunters, farmers, herders, traders, families, and children who carried ancestry farther than any single culture could predict. A skull cannot be safely dressed in modern identity just because it was found under modern soil. That is the lesson from La Braña. That is the lesson from Cheddarman. That is the lesson from the 2015 ancient DNA syntheses that divided modern European ancestry into multiple deep streams rather than one continuous line. The genome did not make Europeans less European. It made the word more historical. It showed that ancestry is not a costume preserved unchanged from the Ice Age. It is a chain of survival through change. The shock is not that early Europeans were different from modern stereotypes. The shock is that the stereotype stood for so long with so little direct evidence. Ancient DNA has now given the skeletons their own testimony. It says some early Western hunter-gatherers carried light eyes, without the full later pattern of light skin variants. It says farming migration changed the genetic map. It says Bronze Age steppe ancestry changed it again. It says modern Europeans descend from mixture, not from a single untouched tribe. The first Europeans were not textbook caricatures, racial symbols, or simple previews of modern nations. They were people. They made tools, crossed forests, followed animals, buried their dead, survived cold seasons, and carried genomes that do not fit the drawings placed over them thousands of years later. Some carried combinations of traits that now surprise us only because modern categories trained us to expect the wrong thing. Darker skin and blue eyes feel contradictory if the present is forced onto the past. In the ancient record, they are not contradictory. They are evidence. For careful genetic history, hidden ancestry evidence, and the human record most people were never taught to read, subscribe to the Genome Archive. The archive keeps correcting the image. No purity myth, no hierarchy, only migration, adaptation, mixture, and memory.